Welcome to another episode of Framing the Hammer, the podcast produced by 4A Arts, the American Alliance of Artists and Audiences, where our mission is more or less changing the narrative around American arts and culture and the way creativity is supported and funded by elected leaders at the local, state, and federal levels. I'm your host and executive director of 4A Arts, Gavin Lodge, and today we are on the topic of arts and artificial intelligence. What are the common thoughts, fears, and hopes? I'm delighted to be joined by Boris Eldagsen and Jason Allen. Both are artists with a history of creativity and experimentation in artificial intelligence and AI-generated art. They've both been award winners for their work and have had different reactions to the awards they were honored with. And that is what brings us all together today. And before jumping in with our guests, I also want to note that we are joined by the Director of Research for 4A Arts, my friend and colleague, Whitney Christensen, who has been instrumental in our deep dive into arts and artificial intelligence. So welcome everybody here today. And to just introduce ourselves for both of you, can we get a little bit of context as to why you're here? And for our listeners who may be new about this, give us just a little bit of your background. Shall we start on the American side of the border? Jason, give us a little bit of your story.
Hi, Whitney. Hi, Gavin. Hi, Boris.
Hey.
It's nice you guys. So, yeah, I'm Jason M. Allen. I'm the founder and CEO of Incarnate Games Incorporated and more recently Art Incarnate Incorporated, which was a direct result of my accolades of creating the first AI-generated artwork that won a prize at a fine art competition, and that was Théâtre d'Opéra Spatiale.
Boris, from the other side of the pond, thank you for joining us from your home in Germany. And can we hear just a little bit about where you've been and where you're from?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. I'm a visual artist. I studied fine arts and philosophy with a teaching degree. I always worked with photography for 30 years, also with video and installation, and I started with drawing. And at the end of last year, I wanted to find out if photo competitions are aware that AI-generated images could be handed in and apply it with an AI-generated image as a test, not to win anything. And to my surprise, the electrician, an image of mine, was selected as category winner for the Sony World Photography Awards. And the conversation with the organizers ended in me refusing the award on stage because they were not willing to disclose that the image was AI generated and that it's necessary to have a conversation about the relationship between photography and AI.
Thank you, Boris. It's great to have you here. And as a way of being able to hear Whitney's voice as well, I'd love starting out the podcast by just asking what comes to mind for you first, because I know it's a big question. What comes to mind for all of you when I say what piece of art influenced you or inspired you as a kid that might have put you on the path where you are now? And Whitney, can we start with you?
I would probably say, rather than just one single piece of art, it was a genre and a style. I had a teacher in late elementary school who introduced us to sort of the standards in American musical theater, the Rodgers and Hammerstein work, so the canon of Rodgers and Hammerstein, and we would watch them in sequence over lunch periods. And so I got started in theater watching Oklahoma and Carousel and Sound of Music and all of those pieces, and just fell in love with the idea of people can just randomly break out into song. And I loved music, and I sang in church choirs and things like that as a kid, and so that piece where it was the music and the dance and all of that integrated into stories and lives and all of that, and the colors and the spectacle. And so that was probably where I fell in love with musical theater and kind of got me on the path for today. So
thanks, Whitney. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, growing up, I don't know if I would say I would have too many artistic influences from like traditional art in that sense, but I mean, I watched Transformers.
Yes.
There was
Oh,
a show called Mask.
Yes.
Mask, yeah. And I watched that all the time. Yeah. Star Wars, of course.
Uh-huh.
So, did I mention Teddy Ruxpin
Yeah.
already?
These are definitely, this is a
Yeah,
lot of fantastic Americana from the 90s and the 90s, right,
definitely.
Jason?
So I
yeah.
had a huge collection of Star Wars action figurines, when that was all the craze back in the 80s and the 90s. And yeah, I mean, Michael Jackson. I mean, my
Right.
favorite. I would run around in the house in my underwear singing Michael Jackson with the Superman cape on. I mean, that's, seriously, like,
Yeah.
Club.
crazy.
How about you, Boris?
It was actually photography, to be precise, album covers of records. I remember especially a Depeche Mode album cover with this
Nice.
man and a sledgehammer in front of the Matterhorn.
Uh-huh.
And later I found out that most of the 80s record covers I loved had been taken by one and the same British photographer, Brian Griffin. I got to meet him through the European Photography Festival circle, and I'm very happy to see him twice a year. Yeah, he's still alive and kicking and an inspiration. And for me, he was for sure someone that influenced my photography when I was a teenager.
Along with the music of Depeche Mode, I would hope as well.
I love Depeche Mode. That is so cool.
Yes. But I was more interested in Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And through Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, I got onto philosophy. It's a very weird story because they used quotes of Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to know what is it all about? What are they talking about? And that was my first encounter with philosophy. So you see how with mass media, you can get in contact with different artworks and thoughts.
And have a more universal and long-term theme going on and influencing all sorts of people with that. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. So, Jason, the New York Times quoted you as saying, "Art is dead, dude. It's over. AI won. Humans lost." Now,
Yeah.
when we spoke earlier, you stated that you felt that comment was taken out of context. And the longer version was something more like, if this isn't art and I'm not an artist, then art is dead. So could you discuss what you meant with this quote?
Sure. So I feel AI art is the literal manifestation and byproduct of art is dead. It's the natural progression of what happens when art has lost its function and critical potential in the modern world. And this is reflecting a lot of philosophy of Jean Baudrillard. And so art once stood as a beacon of originality, a challenge to the mainstream, a reflection of deeper truths and realities. And art no longer stands outside the system to critique it, as it once tended to do, but it's become swallowed up by the very system that it once critiqued. So when I'm talking about art is dead, I'm referencing like classical art in the traditional sense is dead. Obviously, art created using past methods can still contribute to individual growth and enlightenment, which is one of the missions of art. And obviously, it can still be appreciated as something nice to look at. But for society at large as a whole, there isn't anything that it's offered to us recently that historically hasn't already been represented or captured. Like what art movement, what critical piece of information can art offer to us that we don't already possess in the postmodern world? I would posit nothing. I would say nothing. It's become vestigial and a ceremonious exercise in futility. Contemporary art, rather than challenging the status quo, has become complicit with the system of control, becoming another commodity and losing its critical edge. So we're brought full circle then in terms of AI art, where we can see artists demonstrating this fact in spades. They're talking about how AI art is going to replace artists and destroy their livelihoods. Of course, these claims that they're making are hypothetical, but whether or not that's true, it proves that they're complicit in the commoditization of art.
May I interrupt?
Sure,
so
sure.
we're not ending any users because there are so many thoughts that you put into sentences. I think it would be nice to go through them step by step before we continue. The definition of art is multiple. I think each of us might end up with a different definition of art. For me, art is an expression of the human condition. And it is an invitation, an impulse for the viewer to start an inner journey, to become aware of the personal reaction. Why am I attracted by a certain piece? Why am I appalled? What kind of memories, emotions, ideas are triggered? And I think this definition of art for me is not dead. It is alive. And I think maybe we start with defining art first, and then we can discuss, is it dead or not? How is the relationship with politics, with society, with the art market?
Jason, how do you define art?
So, sure, yeah, I simply define art as bringing vision into form. And this is something that I've been reflecting a lot on recently. So I adopted that definition from Alex Gray, who is the most prolific psychedelic artist of our time.
I know him, but couldn't design not be the same then, bringing vision into form?
Oh, absolutely, I agree with that. But
shouldn't there be a difference between design and art?
So I guess we have to define design. What is your definition of design then?
Let's hear that.
The difference between design and art is that design has a function. Sometimes the function is to make something more attractive, to be able to sell it. Yeah, there's a marketing perspective. Sometimes design has a functional aspect. A car doesn't need to be beautiful to be fast.
Sure. So you can make aesthetic value judgments based on designs or off of a plate of sushi, right? So, of course, all of these things serve as different functions. Art being solely for the evocative properties of it. Because I agree with you where I was heading with this idea of bringing vision into form. I've actually evolved my definition of this where it's more like in the pursuit of bringing your vision into form, you are then taken on a journey of discovery, and these things that you are going to discover along the way that provide meaning to you and others, that really speaks to each individual differently. And I think that that's a really great definition of art for me. But then, of course, you could ascribe those attributes onto anything, and that's just a byproduct of our postmodern culture.
So I'd like to break in here a little bit because it seems like we're blurring the lines a little bit between two questions. And the first question being, what is art? What makes one film art and the next one not? In fact, I feel like, Boris, I know you and Gavin talked about the concept of kitsch. And that AI can create kitsch, something that's close to Van Gogh, but not actually it. You mimic. I think it says that there's something missing. And so what makes something art is the first question. And the second question I'm hearing a lot of blur over here and overlap is the idea of purpose. And Boris, you mentioned that design has a function. Does art have a purpose?
For me, there's a difference between art, design, and entertainment. Art needs to be more than entertainment and design. And what I already said is an impulse for an inner journey is what Jason meant with an option to grow as a person. And I think this is something that art does. It inspires me to think differently, to become aware of how I think, how I feel, and maybe as a result, to have a personal growth. That's it. And besides that, you have an industry that is selling artworks as a commodity, as a status symbol whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything Boris has to say. My answer is going to be very similar. The mission of art, I would say, the purpose is transformation. So the transformative power of art, looking at art, it can facilitate personal and collective, societal growth, like he was saying, transformation, by connecting with the creative process and engaging with others and their visionary creative works. Each individual can experience profound shifts in their consciousness and their worldview. And once we've departed from any sort of revelatory or meaningful impact that art, quote unquote art, would have on the individual or society at large, it's no longer serving a purpose. It's just a commodity. So, I mean, I know this narrative of, AI art being kitsch or ersatz, and I mean, I have strong opinions about that, because
let me jump in here. I am curious if a lot of the purpose of art is to help growth and to help society connect and whatnot. Then if art is dead, Jason, does that mean that society can't grow anymore?
Well, I mean, I think what we're seeing, I'm not just, this isn't just me saying that, this,
It's
that
okay.
there has been a domino effect of sort of collapsing or a degradation of our society and culture. And not a lot of people would agree with that. But is this because we've reached a point where we are no longer able to discover these new art movements that have been lauded in the past for having enlightened the population or served a purpose, right? I don't think so. Like, personally, I'm thinking that AI art has this ability to go into a new form of transformative power where we're interpolating through the ideas of forms, right? So, like, this is something Baudrillard could have never predicted, because, like, when he's talking about the hyperreal simulacra, right, where we're just creating copies of things, where your idea of a princess might, be a Disney princess when you think of it in your mind, and that's just literally a copy of, we're just representing things based off of something else that's already been done before. I'm kind of going all over the place right now, but ultimately what I'm saying is he couldn't have predicted that we could interpolate between two forms and concepts using technology. And this opens up a whole new world of new universe and exploration that, for me personally, has I've discovered things I could have never imagined, right? And that's super inspiring and kickstarts the imagination into registers that I wasn't even privy of, and that sparks debates and more conversations and vibrant discussions. And I think that it's I'm kind of veering off the question a little bit, but I think that we can use our technology to propel and realize the purpose of art in a way that hasn't been done before, like all art movements have done in the past. And right now we're being faced with vehement opposition. So it's like, okay, you are completely against challenging your worldview. You're completely against challenging the status quo. Well, then art is dead, right? Well, then we can't go any further. So,
well, speaking of not going any further, let me stop you there for just a second. Boris, I have a specific question for you, but I would imagine you have some thoughts you'd like to share too in response.
Yes. I think we can talk about Baudrillard later and my understanding, and
Sure.
also about Plato, and try to make it easy and simple. But the sentence "art is dead," or what people are afraid of, is that artists will not be necessary in the future to create art. And I think this is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I know how AI generators work. Yeah, you need skills, and you have 3 different parts of the process. You need to have a human being to get it going. Yeah, to have a vision, an idea, to put it in a prompt, to put it in a workflow. Then the AI does all the mathematics, generating stuff. You get results. And then again, you need an experienced human to evaluate and to make a choice, select, take it further, redefine the prompt, start again, and so ever. And in my understanding, art is an expression of the human condition. And I see myself as like a director in a movie where I know the strengths and weaknesses of the AI image generators. I combine them in a workflow. I do like dozens, 50 aesthetic decisions. And if an AI would be able to do so, all the 3 parts of the creative process, has a motivation to create something like this. And then what should it be about? About the human condition? No, it should be about the AI condition. And then we are talking about 2 different species. And this is not happening yet.
I think there are a lot of misconceptions among people who don't spend a lot of time in art about what that process is. And a lot of people think that, you just plug in Mona Lisa in the style of Van Gogh. And I mean, you might get that, but that's not really going to be art. But what the 2 of you do is a much more iterative, much more detailed process to create a very specific thing. And while we've heard about that process, our viewers on the other end haven't heard that. So I would love to hear from both Boris and Jason about what is that process and how do you develop the final piece that you're looking for?
It became more and more complex. I start with text prompt. And I created a text prompting system where I can use over 13 different elements of a text prompt. And the majority of them refer to your knowledge in image making or photography if you want to generate something that looks like photography. If you want to generate something that looks like painting, you need a different background because it is about the keywords, the terminology. And once I have generated images with text prompt, I use them in Midjourney Blend to make a fusion of them, but it's not the end. Then I use those blends to take them further with an image prompt. And that means you are not only using text in the prompt, you can also upload images as a reference. And then the result is not finished yet. I spent 1 or 2 days in post-production using in-painting, out-painting, or as Photoshop Beta is calling it today, generative fill. And that post-production now for me is like 40% of the image. Yeah, and it's not only cleaning up things, it's developing it further. So each of those stages is giving me an impulse of taking it further. And these decisions are made by me, not by the machine. How are you working, Jason?
Sure. So that's a brilliant description and very apt for how prompt engineering or promptography works, which I want to commend you on. I don't know if you coined the term promptography, but
I'm just a promoter.
So I've definitely adopted that term. I think that it's very apropos for what we do. So yeah, when I first started using Midjourney, I have a computer science background, so not so much as a traditional artist or a trained artist like you, Boris, in photography, but I do know that the more knowledgeable you are about art, the stronger your prompts and therefore the stronger your outputs will be. This is why it's so frustrating to me to hear artists that don't want to have anything to do with it, because I'm thinking in my mind, you would be the best at creating prompts because you understand the language. Art is not only a visual language, there's a way to describe and observe art. And people who are talented in this area are able to describe an image in the form of text, which is what AI models are trained on, right? Deep learning. So it would be amazing, imagine, if you will, if we had artists coming together that know the visual language and the descriptive language of art to then create new, more robust AI systems, AI image generators, where it would then become literally an artist's tool. But I'm digressing a bit. So I go, as a computer science background, I go through extensive testing, and I put in all the different types of keywords related to things that I am aesthetically drawn to, and seeing, cause and effect. What kind of result is this going to have? What kind of result? What if I remove this? What if I put this instead? What if I just create a random, I try to find very visual words because these have a very grand effect in the output. So after I went through exhaustive testing, I finally arrived at an aesthetic that I was looking for. And one night or day, I don't remember, I was in the middle of sleeping and dreaming. I was in a hypnagogic state, and I started imagining these women in Victorian dresses wearing space helmets. And I was like, wow, that's something I've never thought of or seen before. Oh, I could put this into Midjourney, right? So I'm taking my testing with the aesthetic that I've established and combining it with this vision, literally a dream that I had, into the testing, and voila, Space Opera Theater was born. Obviously, there's a whole lot more going into everything because the technology is always advancing, with image to image, and now text to film, text to video. So it's hard to really lock down a process when it's constantly evolving.
Yeah,
which is a very exciting aspect of it all, for sure.
Right.
And it's helpful. I often, when I was stuck somewhere in the process, it always happens that 2 weeks later you have a new feature. It's going to solve the problem.
I think, again, for listeners who have not, who aren't super familiar with your works or your backgrounds, in our earlier conversations, I'm going to ask Jason a specific question about something in his background, and then Boris something in his. But Jason, you described something that we are really interested in here at 4A Arts, is the idea of getting average, ordinary, non-art people who don't consider themselves artists to consider themselves as artists, or to acknowledge and understand how often they are dealing with creative processes, or unlock that creative process and give people access to that. So for you, Jason, what I would love you to kind of explain to our viewers is, how did you get from your computer and your technological background into art? And do you feel like AI has allowed you to accomplish something or access something in that creative process that you felt was denied or inaccessible to you before?
Yeah, that's the essence of it, really. I have been an art director in the past. I have a high appreciation for art, and I know something about it, but I've never been trained or would never really create art in the traditional sense, like the past way of creating art. So when AI art presented itself and I'm seeing art that I've never seen, I realized once I started using it that this is the most powerful form of human freedom of expression that's ever been created. Like, you don't have to be an artist to make art anymore. And some people don't like that, but I think it's amazing, right? You have this power to put into the hands of the smallest device for anyone in the world that wants it, to now be able to express their imagination. We're all creative beings here. We all have an imagination. We all have a story to tell. And no one can tell you how to make your art, whether you're an artist or not. You want to, in the past, typically, historically, this type of activity was reserved for the rich and the elite, people that didn't have to labor through life in order to support themselves and their family. So They have all this extra time to create art, and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, I'm not, casting any judgments, but not everyone has this privilege. But that doesn't make us any less creative or less imaginative. So if someone that's been working all day wants to come home and have a therapeutic session with Midjourney and, describe what they were imagining all day and get a result, and satisfactorily so, that's awesome. And I think that this is the biggest art movement of our time. Like, now everyone can create art, and that's amazing.
Boris, how do you feel about that?
Well, from my biography and what I know from my friends is we all had to have jobs to pay the rent.
Right.
And there's a percentage of possibly one of art students that finish their studies that can make a living from their work. That is the reality of visual arts, that I know. And this is internationally. There are some countries you are better off and others it's worse. But in the end, it comes back to the motivation. What is driving you to continue to create, in your remaining time? What is your motivation? And those that I know, they all say, I just need to create. Otherwise, I'm turning mad or getting frustrated. And these are the artists, that don't stop, because it's not about others applauding or getting awards or appreciation. It's they do it for themselves. And I think that is very important, to call yourself an artist. And the positive thing that I also see about AI, also amongst younger people, is doing it is so much fun. It's a new way of creating visual outcome by using words. It's not the only way. You can also use images, but by using words is new. And as soon as they realize that knowledge in art history is making a difference, they are motivated to research by themselves. And you have many platforms online that popped up showing you a certain technique of photography, how certain keywords are going to affect the outcome. There are lists of artists that you can use. And people just love it. They research it for themselves like they have never done before. So I think this is the big plus for me. It sucks people in. It is very addictive when you start. In my workshops, I tell the people 30% of you are going to continue until it's 2 a.m. in the morning tonight. And they do. And at some point, when you continue and realize how it works, you start to study by yourself. You have the inner drive, and it's just was kicked off by the technology.
So Boris, I want to ask about storytelling, which is what Jason did. And when we talked, you told me a little bit about your background and how you use the photographs that you used, and we talked about trauma, and I think that's linked to the artistic process.
It's the upcoming work that is going to premiere in 4 weeks. Yes.
So how does your work allow you to tell stories, or process when we talk about what it's doing as an artist? You have that artistic background. What's going on there for you? How much does that show up in your work?
I think it does show up. It's connected to my past, to my artistic past, to what I've done before. And many of my friends told me that they can see my handwriting using AI. They are following my work for 25 years. In the past, I was never interested in storytelling. It's a big thing in photography. And so I called my photographic series poems to say, it's not telling a story. It's like a poem. It's open. It's up for you to enter, and you can finish it with your interpretation. What I'm trying to do now is maybe something different, but it is connected with how I use AI. I don't want to copy anything I have done in photography before. I want to explore things I have not been able to do because I couldn't travel back in time. I couldn't create a fusion of bodies and animals because I would have needed a Hollywood FX team. So this is what attracts me in working with AI image generators, and that I'm working with knowledge and experience. I don't need to go out into the world like photographers do. They need to be present somewhere and interact. I stay at home, but it's good that I have been out in the world before. But my process right now is like when I started with drawing. I'm in my room and I just start and I can create whatever I can envision. And I think that is how Jason works as well.
Do you think that then with AI, does it create a different category of artist who isn't experiencing life and reflecting it, but rather just imagining? I mean, can you be an artist if you haven't had experience and you're only using your imagination?
Well, I think if it is an expression of the human condition, you just need to have a certain age to express yourself. But even children do. So I think I wouldn't say that you need to be like 15 or 20 or whatever. Many children start whenever they can just walk, or even before. You have drawings of your children hanging behind you, Gavin.
Sure do.
So you know about this.
They're very artistic.
I go back to kids and to like how can you become how can you start to express yourself artistically? The pity is that we all have been drawing and doing things and writing poems when we were younger, but then we stop. Why are we stopping as teenagers? Why are we not continuing? Because there are only some continuing, and these become the artists. Why do the others stop? Do you have any answers?
That's always a question that we're trying to tackle here at 4A
That
Arts.
sounds like Alan Watts.
I like him.
Yeah, I can tell.
I'm not familiar with Alan Watts. Jason, can you give us a little context there?
I don't know if I would define him as a modern day philosopher. I think he passed away.
He's a figure of the 60s, and he was teaching philosophy. We could say Eastern philosophy, so getting into Buddhism and Zen. He was a very good speaker, and you can find many of his classes recorded, and I think I have hundreds. Because he's very good.
If you listen to Alan Watts, he'll really explore this idea of why we stopped doing the things that we did when we were children, and a lot of it is systemic. The idea of money and the pursuit of happiness being correlated with the pursuit of money, and that's it equates to adulthood in our society. So I mean, I think that would answer a lot of questions. It really is outside the scope of this conversation, but it did remind me of it.
It goes hand in hand though, because I would love to hear both of you give your 2 cents on Plato's forms or Plato's ideas and Baudrillard, because you've both mentioned them. And I think it's kind of integral to both of your definitions of where we are with art and where we are with AI art.
I have always been a fan of Plato. Plato said, let's take an example of a table. They come in different forms and shapes and material, and they are transient. And somewhere there's a timeless idea of a table, the Platonic form. And that could be that it's something like a plate, you can eat, work on it, and something below needs to hold it. And the AI has seen so many images of tables that it has understood this timeless archetype. And then it depends on my prompt if the AI is generating a table round, metal painted with red, 4 legs, or if it's going to generate something that is Swedish, oak tree, massive, whatever. So this is one relation to Plato. And the second, and I think that is the combination with Baudrillard, Plato's cave is one of my favorite
Perfect.
metaphors. He says, imagine there are people in a cave and they are chained to the wall and they can't go out. And then behind them, there is another wall hiding the way out of the cave. People are walking by, carrying objects. Behind the people, you have a fire. So the only thing that the people that are chained in that cave can see are the shadows on the wall created by those people carrying stuff and talking, and they connect the voices to the shadows on the wall. And that is a story about education and reality. And Plato says, imagine one of those chained people can get free and tries to get out of here. So for him, the shadows were unexamined ideas. And when you get out and you see the fire, you see the origin of those unexamined ideas. And then that person gets out of the cave and is blinded by the light. And the first, his eyes need to adjust. So he can't look into the sun, it's too bright, but he can see the reflection of the sun on the water surface. So it's the next step of getting closer, to the origin, where it all comes from. And at some time, that person is able to look up into the sun. And this is, for him, reality. There is something that is real and timeless, symbolized by the sun. But our reality is living in a cave, thinking that shadows are real. And for him, that person that got out is the philosopher. And of course, the philosopher, after seeing all of this, wants to go back to his friends and tell them about this reality out there. And going back into the darkness, he can't see. His eyes need to adjust again. And he falls down into the cave and to his friends, and they don't believe him because he can't see. And he said, what kind of bullshit are you talking to us? What's the meaning of it? Why should we get out to become blind as well? And I like that story. And it's not just this Western story. There's an Eastern story of blind man and an elephant that tries to talk about the same thing.
Assuming, Jason, you can endorse Boris's introduction to Plato there, can you tell us about Baudrillard and hyperrealism?
Yeah, so his discussion on Plato's theory of forms is very good. There's this high level idea, an ideal. What is true reality? It's represented by an idea, and that we all then try to replicate in reality. So it's in a way kind of similar to Baudrillard's philosophy of the hyperreal, in that it's our reality. Because I think that the segue from the Plato's forms theory to the cave allegory is a perfect segue into the hyperreal. So this is Jean Baudrillard's theory, hyperreal, from his books actually, Transparency of Evil and Simulation and Simulacra, which posits that our postmodern world is dominated by simulacra, or copies without originals. And this is replete throughout our culture. This is the essence of postmodernism. And this hyperreality, as he calls it, is where the distinction between the real and the simulated becomes indistinguishable. But what Baudrillard was saying is that this leads to the erosion of authenticity and meaning. So at first glance, Plato and Baudrillard's philosophies kind of seem to be at odds, where Plato emphasizes the primacy and perfection of an unseen reality in this theory of forms. Baudrillard emphasizes that there's a loss of the real in the face of the relentless reproduction and simulation. However, I think that this gives us AI art, gives us a profound bridge between these two philosophies. So I've been kind of contemplating this, trying to reconcile the two by converging these two philosophies. And while it can get really complicated, I think I can encapsulate it like this, and with a question at the end. What I don't think Baudrillard could have predicted in his time was this idea of transcendent simulacra, where we aren't merely just making copies of copies of copies, where we're taking a form and realizing it in reality. And then taking what we've realized and making a copy of that and making a copy of that. Instead, in the case of AI, we're able to create original ideas and concepts out of hyperreality through the interpolation of forms.
Maybe before we get into this, we give an example for Gavin, because
that would be great. Thank you. Yes.
Before that, I can give an American example and an Argentinian. I also think that for Baudrillard, it was more typology of images and what he saw that we ended up in the 80s in capitalistic countries. So if you have a basic reality, it can be a pumpkin. And then if you go away and distort this reality as a simulation, you can have a pumpkin pie. Yeah, and it's kind of like falsely sweet and creamy, but it still acknowledges, okay, it comes from a pumpkin. Then you can go a higher level and you can say we can have a pumpkin pie latte. Yeah, and that is not pumpkin, it's just artificial spices. And then hyperreality would be we can have a pumpkin pie latte flavored Oreo cookie.
Now I'm ready for fall.
Now you got it. Yeah, you see these references don't have a meaning. Where in Plato you have shadows on the wall because there had been objects and a fire. For Baudrillard, we have the shadows on the wall, but there is no fire anymore and no object. And how are we getting back to AI now?
Yes, please.
Can AI create something new or not? I think that is a basic decision we had for months. And people, if they don't dig deeper into the technology, say, no, it's just copies. Yeah, it's the training material. And how can you go beyond? And I think Jason would say, yeah, you can go beyond.
I feel like I have gone beyond.
But Boris, what do you say? Can we go beyond?
I think we can go beyond, but only if you add a human being in the process.
Absolutely.
Those who say AI is just like a statistic montage, a combination of things, and it's not real. Again, reality is a complex philosophical term that we could talk about hours. There are like a dozen different theories on reality. But what is creativity? What is intelligence? The things we are talking about here, nobody can truly define. They are abstract terms, they are philosophical. And I read articles that there was a Torrance test of creativity and ChatGPT has scored very high and is now as creative as humans. Yes, according to this test. But how is the test working? What is the definition of creativity for that test? These things nobody talks about. They all assume that creativity is an easy to be defined. It's not. It's very difficult with creativity, with good, evil, intelligence, happiness, all of these terms.
Yeah. They're all forms.
Again,
they're all forms.
They are forms, and we try to define the timeless form, but we are not able to. We are just able to create transient interpretations, and they might be personal, they might belong to a certain group or to a certain culture, but that is the main problem I see in the mainstream articles about AI images, that those terminologies are not defined.
It's so tough to have definitions when this is all such a human experience. Everybody has different backgrounds, different ages, different education, different views of the world. But bringing this all back down, is the artist chained in a cave, or is the artist they who have left the cave and are looking directly into the sun? Or
that's a personal decision that they have to make for themselves. Absolutely. Yes. If you want to stay in the cave, and be told that you're in a cave, then you can stay in the cave if you want.
But it's a perspective of for yourself whether you're in the cave or not. The unexamined life is chosen.
Right.
Then you
Boris?
talk about how can you make a choice? How do you get informed? Is it related to the family you are born into, the educational system you are born into, the culture you are born into? Where do you start?
Yeah, that's kaleidoscopic. So it's like now we're in a hall of mirrors where essentially not only is each person in their own version of a cave, there are caves within caves, like there's
Sure.
this is ad infinitum.
Yeah.
But I think that coming together and sharing each other's perspectives is what is one of the purposes of art, to open our understanding and to further escape these types of caves and ways of thinking.
To navigate between different caves, whether or not we're exiting the cave or not, we are in a human experience navigating different shadows, different forms, different hyperrealities to at least come to a, hopefully, dare I say, higher form of connection between people, facilitated by art and creativity. Okay, here's my dumb question. One, it seems to me in all of these metaphors and allegories that AI art is the shadows on the wall, and that non-AI art, just a child drawing a picture or writing a poem, is actually the artist who's out of the cave. What do you think?
No.
Go ahead. Why not, Boris?
What I find fascinating in working with AI is that it is a mirror of mankind. For me, it is what Carl Gustav Jung in his psychology 100 years ago called the collective unconscious. The data that was used for training is not really cleaned up. If you go to the old Stable Diffusion versions, everything people have produced is in there. It's not complete, but it's a lot. And I find it fascinating to work with this as a material. And it is my task as an artist to connect my personal conscious, my life, with the collective unconscious of the training data and steer the AI to create a certain kind of outcome. And I want this outcome to be open for others to connect. I want this outcome also to be a symbol of the collective unconscious. And I think that is possible. And the child who is making a drawing on the wall is also doing an unconscious act, of the archetypes that we all have embedded in our mind. There are certain ways how children draw dogs and other children and houses.
To drill down on that, then, do you believe that human-created art and AI-created art are fundamentally different, and how so, on whatever level that may be?
I think the distinction is wrong. You assume that we have a strong AI that wants to create art and is doing so, but then we have a different species. The art is human created, and AI is a tool. And the science fiction scenario of doomsday is you have a strong AI, and that is going to replace humans in art. But as I have defined before, that artwork should not copy the human condition, but should tell us about the AI condition.
So you cannot create anything with the AI without human interaction, right? So this is a human activity. I agree that AI is a tool, and you cannot separate the human, which is from the AI technology, which is intrinsically multimodal, to create anything. And this idea, like what Boris is talking about with strong AI or AGI coming into existence, is a hypothetical and isn't the reality. And someone needs to tell the copyright office that. Because they're trying to they just state unequivocally as a statement of fact, which is a false assertion, that the AI made it and that I had nothing to do with it. And they literally said that it is clear that Midjourney created this image, not Jason M. Allen. This is literally being told to me by a regulatory body of the United States government.
Yeah.
And they just state that. It's like, well, you haven't provided any evidence that demonstrates beyond a doubt that human wasn't involved in the creation of this work. So I wouldn't make a distinction between any work of art if a human is involved as being other than or creating these value judgments or any other types of distinctions, because art is ultimately the opinion of the person that's engaging with it, whether it evokes an emotion or not. And I want to make sure that we all recognize this is all our collective human experience, and that, like Boris said, we're not entertaining these doomsday scenarios until, maybe one day. I'm not saying it can't happen, but that's not the case now.
On that note, I mean, speaking of doomsday, let me ask another question along the lines of, what are your thoughts on whether or not AI can develop consciousness in the future?
If it does, we'll never know. So I'm interacting with you as though you are conscious, even though I don't know you are. So I could just be in some kind of some kind of simulated Truman Show, of God's own consciousness, experiencing itself, and then when I die, realize, we're ultimately alone. We're all just this one. I mean, I'm just.
Yeah.
No, but Jason is paraphrasing classic René Descartes philosophical thinking. Yeah?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And you can doubt anything here. And he tried to go back to a source. What can't I doubt about? And in the end, his result was that I'm doubting. And then he tried to rebuild reality on that idea. But again, consciousness is one of those terms we can't define as well.
Sure.
It's like creativity, intelligence, consciousness. Yeah, we'll see.
Right. So if AI ever does become conscious, let's just entertain that, and we can't be aware of it. We can't know that. So it would be meaningless to us. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, hypothetically, it does. Are you asking me what my concerns are if this is happening, or are you asking me, do I think that can actually happen, even though we can't prove it?
I'd be curious to know what both of your concerns are vis-a-vis arts and creativity.
Well, I don't think it will. But if it did, is this something so terrible? Wasn't it Whitney? Weren't you the one telling me there was a scientific study saying that once an organism or any system becomes significantly complex, that it's tantamount to consciousness?
That's what I was actually typing into my search bar over there, because I was like, I need to find this article. So the idea is, it's a mathematical proposition that that consciousness increases with complexity of an idea, and so what they were reaching for, and kind of the end goal, is that could mean that Earth itself has a consciousness to it, because it's an infinitely complex item. And then you get into things like galaxies, solar systems, galaxies, all of that. And so is the universe itself conscious? It's a really kind of, but it's all based on mathematical principles, which is a really fascinating thing.
If AI becomes conscious, finally, we'll have the ability to point at and recognize and define consciousness itself. And that sounds amazing to me, because we aren't able to do that as humans. So maybe if a super intelligent AI does become conscious, it can show us the way. But that's crazy. So.
And
what do you think,
I would say I'm not more afraid of a conscious AI than I am of already existing psychologically disturbed world leaders.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? Yeah,
Right.
the danger is not any larger.
I was just going to have Boris expand on that a little bit, because when we talked earlier, we mentioned concerns about deep fakes and how that is something that AI could, that humans could be using AI to create, and the idea of not being able to determine what's real and what's not, what's a shadow on the cave wall versus what's reality. How can you tell us a little bit about that concern, Boris?
Again, I'm deeply involved in the German umbrella organization of photographers in Germany, and we talk to the media and to politicians here. I have no clue what the consequences could be for democracy and for press. And I think free press is very important as a pillar of democracy. When you can't distinguish authentic images from generated images, are we all going to live in alternative realities? And are we going to lose a basis of facts that we can talk about in democracy and trying to find an arrangement? How can we maintain a trust in the press, in photojournalism, in authentic images? How can we differ in social media between those two? Because the authentic images will always be less in numbers than fake generated images, and to generate fakes has become so easy. You can generate them so quickly, like it has never been. And yeah, I think the awareness is rising that this is going to happen. I'm in contact with an American initiative that is going to launch in October, Writing with Light, initiated by Fred Richin and Magnum photographers and American universities. And they try to create a sign like a copyright symbol that you can put behind their images, and they subscribe to a code of ethics in photojournalism. So they want to create a positive label, that you can trust a certain source of image. And they are really afraid about the upcoming American elections. I think it's going to be the first important big elections that will be disturbed by AI images and deepfakes.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you would say that consumers and non-specialists should be able to tell the difference between what is real and what is not in photography, and what is, excuse me, I shouldn't say real, what is AI generated or altered versus not AI generated or altered. And should the same go for art that is inspired by AI or not? Going back to the question, should the everyday public be able to distinguish between them?
I think the everyday public should be able to trust the media, that they have set up a system in which they clearly state if an image is generated or not, if it's manipulated or authentic. I think we need to maintain authenticity. In the arts, I don't need that. In the arts, I even don't need copyright, because at the end it all relates to the gallerist, and his circles of art fairs and collectors, and if a certain artwork has an edition and is signed by the artist.
Jason, your thoughts on
I
that?
think, ultimately what we're talking about is what people are intending to use AI for. Whether it's for good or for bad. And this is just everything in the world, right? This has just become something that's bigger, more powerful. So maybe we have more responsibility for news media and stuff. They are coming from a position of perceived trust. And obviously, if they're using any tool or any method at all with the intent to deceive, it doesn't matter if it's AI or not, like that's coming from a moral place, an ethical place, a human place. It shouldn't be an indictment on the technology itself. I know that we really focus on a lot of the negative outcomes or possible aspects of AI implications. These are all hypotheticals, of course. So if you would, indulge me to be hypothetically in the positive.
Please, let's absolutely
so
get some
like
positivity here.
we might end up realizing something. So like fear of change, right? Like, but this fear of change could be holding us back from realizing something we've never had before, like that we can create together in the most impactful and efficient, amazing way possible. Like, who would be against that? Well, people that are afraid of change, there's huge pushback against that. I'm just hypothetically saying, I'm not positing that we're going to create this utopia anytime soon because the human condition just wouldn't allow it. But I mean,
what are some of those positives? So this is a thing that we got to talk about. What are your highest hopes? What are the things that you think could be accomplished in a positive way? Like, what would be some specifics?
I'm already experiencing this firsthand with the sharing of AI images, for example, with a loved one or a friend. I am guaranteed the authenticity in the sense of originality, that this image has never been seen by anybody other than myself and the person I choose to share it with. That's a therapeutic experience. It's super satisfying. It brings connection that I wasn't able to establish before with others. Unbelievably so. Okay, I don't want to get into personal, very specifics.
We are here for all the feelings. Bring on all the feelings.
My own personal, sure, my own personal, what I see end up, if I extrapolate on this idea, maybe you, let's say, for example, and your significant other, you both had a long day, you come home, sit down on the couch, and you want to say, hey, honey, I want to watch an adventure rom-com starring you and me as the lead protagonists, and we go, and we'll call it Whisked Away, where we find this antique clock or stopwatch or something that allows us to whisk us through time and space, and we experience all these crazy adventures through history together, and ultimately we realize that it's ultimately about having each other that is the most important aspect of our experiences together, and you see this unfold before you as a movie, like using generative AI. Sure. This is going to happen. So that's an experience you and your significant other have never had, but then you just now experienced it as though you did vicariously through the movie. Like who wouldn't want that? So I've experienced that in some way with another person on a very much lesser level, but that ultimately what I'm saying is this AI technology will become individually customizable to every person, like to the personal level. But I also have some concerns about that.
Boris, what?
I want to hear those, but Boris, I want to hear about Boris's too. So,
Boris, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? What I love about AI is that it creates a completely new way of generating images, of creating images. It's an undiscovered territory. Yeah, we only see the coastline, parts of it. And there is no handbook, how to create a workflow, how to use that tool. And if you just concentrate on language, you can play with words, you can make up words, you can describe impossible scenarios. You will always get a result. And there's so much room for experiment. And the last time I was that excited was when I entered art school. And now I have 30 years experience and can use this experience and go further. This is something that liberates me from matter. I can create whatever I have in my imagination. It doesn't matter what kind of tools I own, what kind of location, model, light, etc. is at my hands. And that is the basis for absolute artistic freedom.
So I have a question about the concerns, which is that, so when Jason's talking and Boris is talking, like this unfettered access to creativity and ability to create new things. And Jason, you mentioned a way to connect with other people that you were, and that's create an adventure that you can go on with a loved one. But my brain goes to, I don't know if you all have seen Demolition Man. It's an older Sylvester Stallone movie. Do you know where I'm going with this?
I've heard of it.
With Sandra Bullock, and there's a scene, it's in the future, and in this scene he's about to get romantic with Sandra Bullock's character, and she goes, and apologies, this is a little bit already, but she says, we're going to have sex, and she puts a VR headset on him and on herself, and they begin getting intimate, but they don't touch each other. It's all virtual reality created. And so obviously that's a little bit satirical, but how do we make sure that we're still using it as a tool to connect with real people, rather than becoming this world where we just disengage into VR and ignore the world?
Barbarella.
Yeah.
Or connecting in the hyper real, or the just mere watching shadows on the wall, right?
So, yeah, I think that intimacy can be experienced in more ways than just physical. So, I don't really have a concern with that specific example per se, unless we're talking about propagation of the species, in which case it is concerning if we're just all living in this inception world where we're just living the dream and never, producing more people.
But if you and the other person are not experiencing the same thing, if you were just both kind of turning on screens and going down your own little rabbit hole.
So that was my concern. I was gonna mention that with the advent of hyper individual customization of content, it may prove in the future that it will become increasingly more difficult to find things in common with other people, because everyone's just experiencing their own isolated version of whatever reality they want to experience. And perhaps that could create a challenge to relate with other people. But I mean, I don't know. Like I've been saying, that could also turn into something beautiful, such as the interpolation between forms, because we're all kind of like a form. Like we're all kind of like going through the algorithm of life, right? We're a product of our society and the things we experience. So the output, we're living the current output of ourselves. So maybe if I were to interact with someone that has a completely different experience than mine, and then we, come together and find the interpolation between us, that could create something beautiful too. I mean, these are all hypothetical things.
Sure. Boris, your thoughts on these concerns?
I don't even know what you asked. But I can try to give an answer. Or do you want to rephrase?
Well, let me take a stab at it. Just saying, what do you think about a future world where we're all living in our own virtual realities, where we might be having parallel artistic experiences, experiencing something else, but we're not really experiencing it, the same thing, connected together?
Well, I don't see 100% virtual reality coming. Yeah, we still have a body. We need to eat and drink and go to the toilet. It's not going to change. What we created since the 90s is a hybrid existence between things that are digital, connecting us over distances, and everything we add on top is going to expand it. I have been a cybersex addict 20 years ago, an addict who was spending nights there. And I found it fascinating that you could connect with a person just talking, just through words and the sound of a voice. And I had this fantasy of when I'm old and I'm in a wheelchair, I can still continue to do so. But what we have with AI is that between the reality of like having a conversation or my voice, your voice, that can be fake. My voice can sound like, I don't know, Brad Pitt's voice. Yeah, that person on the other side can have a fake voice. What that person is saying, it could be an AI, not a person. Yeah, I think that is changing my fantasy that I had of me being retired. We'll see.
Yeah.
I think at the end it's going to be hybrid in some way, but we still have a body and that body has certain needs and reactions and drives, and they will continue to do so.
So I'm going to bring us to an ending here, but before I ask my last very simple question, are there any points that either of you would like to make or topics to hit before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I'd like to conclude that final thing by putting kind of a capstone on it. In a sense, we're just redefining the way that we're experiencing the problem that we all have with reality, just in new and more fantastical ways. So the question of what true reality is, back to Plato's theory of forms, has existed for a very long time. We've been struggling with these intrinsic, struggles, internalizing these questions, trying to understand consciousness and who we are and where we're going and why this is all happening, et cetera, et cetera. And we're just advancing that into new ways of expression. So like, maybe we should be happy that maybe it's isolating and maybe it's not real, or maybe it's not providing a connection with someone that we long for or whatever. But is this any different than experiences we've always had throughout human history? Or is it the concern that it's becoming more prolific, like pronounced? Maybe that's the issue. But yeah, we could proselytize
Sure.
and talk about
as people have
hypotheticals
been
all
doing
day,
for a millennia or more.
Of course.
Both of you.
Yes, I don't see the human condition changing. Yeah, and I don't see a progress. The progress that we have is technologically, and that creates again new problems. Yeah, but the material of humans is not going to change that quickly, if ever.
Which might also go along with the idea that we will always need creative expression to experience and share our very human experience.
Definitely.
So, talking about the human experience then, what do we get to look forward to in what you all are experiencing and sharing?
So Art Incarnate has partnered with Alta Art, which is a printing facility in Vancouver. They're more than a printing facility, but they have the exclusive license to and only printer technology with which they can create what they call allographs. And an allograph is a 2.5D print. It's been around for maybe 3 or 4 years. Essentially, you print in layers. So it prints UV ink layer after layer after layer, building up a 2.5D, they call it, model. And I was the first to ever produce an AI image in allograph. I call it tradigital promptography.
Fantastic.
So this is when I won in 2022, and I was getting all the backlash and hate. Like in the second day, I thought, I was standing in the gallery and I was like, how could I make this the most art as possible to just quell this entire notion that this is an art? And I thought, what if I could represent Théâtre du Spatial as a literal oil painting? Like, how could I make that happen? Of course, it would have to be technologically. And I searched high and low because I'm not going to paint it myself, right? Not in the traditional sense, right? Of course, because I'm not a painter. So I finally discovered this technology. It's going to be, well, right now at the Colorado State Fair, we revealed the first allograph print called Grand Finale, and it's currently hanging in the gallery at the Colorado State Fair. So the future is announcing that project, and I'm also launching Space Opera Theater at long last on September 13th, the timed release for Théâtre du Spatial prints. Now these are Hanamula 350 GSM fine art prints They're not allographs, which are very expensive to make. So that would be special orders. But yeah, that's everything on the horizon and what I'm working on right now.
That's a lot. Very exciting. We will link to everything that we possibly can to share with our audience.
And what I'm hearing is you just moved your work from the real to the hyper real. You know, you're moving it less pumpkin pie and more pumpkin in a way.
Oh yeah, it's hyper meta. It's hyper meta.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I call it. So tradigital promptography, the expression of AI art physically as a traditional oil painting. Through the use of allograph prints.
Boris, what do we get to look forward to on your end?
Yes, if you ever wondered why the electrician had this 1940s look, it is because it was always connected to a project I'm going to premiere in 4 weeks. It's called Trauma Porn. And it is an installation with an artist friend from Bangladesh, Tanvir Tawalat. And we talk about war as the cause for trauma. And I have been using family photos. I have been collecting images from World War II for over 20 years. And this is the basis to generate images with AI in certain parts of the project. And the installation will have 150 pieces. So there's 30% original photographs from that time that show the whole atrocity. Then this is 1/3. The other third is generated images out of that, like an hallucination. And another third is done with my artist colleague in Bangladesh that has his own way of dissolving material and creating new images out of it. And there's a lot of art, books, films about evil dictators, about the villains that do atrocities. But what about the people that support it at a certain time and or remain as silent part of that country? They support it as well. And if you take out these people, I think the whole system is going to collapse. And my father was born in 1924. He participated in World War II. He never talked about it. He had all the flashbacks at the end of his life. And I wanted to get into his mind with that project. How can it be that you are attracted by a system that becomes more and more totalitarian, that is gearing up for war? What about, what is war? How do you experience it? How is it going to change you? What about the void after the war and what you carry with you throughout your life? And there had been moments in the 80s when my father wanted to dissolve demonstrations on the streets of Germany by throwing flames at them. And I was 14 and I thought, fuck, where is it coming from? I had no clue how to react to this. And the war, the attack of Russia on Ukraine pushed that project further because lots of the photographs that I was collecting had been shot on what is Ukraine today. So I was seeing like 200,000 images from World War II at the time when there was a war on the same ground again. And that is not changing. So that's the timeless aspect. I try to balance out my German bias with my collaborator from Bangladesh, and you will not find any swastikas or any moustaches in that work, but I'm working with the aesthetic of the time, and it's going to be an exhibition that will be unpleasant.
Just as a side note, something that was really, and I know we want to finish, but this is a really exciting thing because with AI, what I understand, it allows you to depict people who may be on a side that they wouldn't agree with today, would not want themselves depicted, and you're able to create fictional humans that look like real humans without sort of pointing fingers at a real person and reenacting that trauma of the time. It sort of avoids the intellectual property questioner because you're creating a fictional human to say this is to embody that idea of supporting a side that's against democracy and against, that's harmful without actually doing that.
Yeah, it's going to be controversial. Some people will say, "How dare you using this material in this way and doing something else with it?" But my partner is a psychologist, and from a psychological perspective, rewriting these images, you are not stuck. You are not this record that is on loop. You can get out of that trauma. And I think it's very important to do this. And so far, the interest had been big. And as a festival in Kaunas, Lithuania, that was, was very fond of it, and is going to premiere it in October. And then there will be 2 more shows in Germany, and we'll see how it's going to travel.
That sounds very Quentin Tarantino.
That's
not that funny.
well, not funny, but
not that entertaining.
Well,
the rewriting of events and for particular purpose.
It is fantastic when art is able to move us beyond trauma and progress, hopefully, optimistically as a society to bring us closer, safer, more peaceful, happier. Can I just ask, what is something artistic that makes you happy these days? And it can be the Transformers cartoon, by the way.
Sure. Oh.
Something that makes me happy that I can recommend is French filmmaker Quentin Dupieux. His movies are full of absurdity. His early movies play in the US, so look it out. Yeah, I recommend his movie called Reality.
Love it.
Playing in the US and talking about filmmaking. Watch it out on Amazon or wherever you'll get it. Quentin Dupieux, Reality.
Love it. Jason?
So, some recommendations, I suppose. So I've always been anti-Apple. Like staunch anti-Apple, never have anything to do with a Mac or an iPhone or anything in my life. Computer science degree, PC all the way, Android. But recently, for the first time ever, I interacted with an Apple platform and I got Apple TV. And because I wanted to watch, it was recommended to me. Oh, shoot. Now I'm going to forget the name of it. Severance, where the actor can live more than one life by having his memory of his work life isolated from the memory of his
personal life,
living personal life. Right. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's very thought-provoking and awesome show. And then Silo with Rebecca Ferguson. I thought that was amazing, and that really speaks to some of the hyper-real questions of our time. I'm a huge fan of Dune. I can't wait for the next Dune movie to come out. Dune. I'm absolutely fascinated. And then, since we're all talking about AI, I think a great final recommendation is for people to definitely go watch the new Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. Oh my God. It is so good. And AI is definitely involved specifically for Tom Cruise. Was awesome to do what he did with that movie. So awesome. Yeah, definitely.
Boris and Jason, thank you so much for spending so much time with us, both late in the afternoon and early in the morning in different time zones. And it's been illuminating, and I think even just this conversation brings us all together closer as people. So I consider this podcast interview art. Thank you
all
making
so
art
much
with us.
It's been a joy.
Thank you for connecting us.